Good evening. It's Tuesday, July 2nd. Thanks for joining us. I'm Ebony Monet. San Diego-based Navy SEAL Eddie Gallagher was found not guilty this afternoon on most of the charges against him. KPBS military reporter Steve Walsh is at Naval Base San Diego, where Gallagher's legal team is responding to the verdict. Steve?
Hi, Ebony. Yes, we're off to the side here. The press conference is already underway. We're listening to Tim Parlatore, his defense attorney. Next to him is his father, Joe Parlatore, and then behind him his wife, Andrea, and then that's SEAL Chief Eddie Gallagher. So we're going to listen in.
They need to reorganize and redo business in the future.
I think there's two other people that need to be acknowledged here right now who've been a rock and a foundation and an inspiration for the defense team, and that's Andrea Gallagher and Sean Gallagher, the chief's brother, who've been steadfast in their support of the legal team and really inspiring to all of us.
Andrea, we hear from you about the moment that you stepped to the mic, for the moment that you were the not guilty verdict, what you were feeling?
I mean, I was feeling like we're finally vindicated after being terrorized by the government that my husband fought for 2 decades in the war on terror. He's fought every major enemy of the United States. He is a righteous and noble individual, and his name has been smeared and slandered and dragged through the mud. And I think that this vindication, I hope, will be a lesson. Due process, and we need to afford the benefit of the doubt to our war heroes who we send over there to fight these evils. I think this
so we're having some audio issues here, so we're trying to listen to Andrea Gallagher talking about how this has been a very long struggle, that she's fought for a long time to get her husband and get to this moment. So we're going to have to move over here since we've got some audio issues with that microphone. So just to recap, Eddie Gallagher was acquitted on 6 of the 7 charges against him, these war crimes, including the most serious crimes, which were premeditated murder, 2 counts of attempted murder. The only charge that he was found guilty of was posing with a dead body on the battlefield. That only carries a maximum of 4-month sentence, and it does not include a dishonorable discharge, so he could not be dishonorably discharged by the court. Obviously, the defense is seeing this as a major win. They're just now coming out of court today. This isn't quite wrapped up, though. The jury went right into the sentencing phase for this. They deliberated throughout the rest of the afternoon after finding him not guilty on 6 of the 7. They'll come back on tomorrow morning, and then they will give the verdict on whether or not he will have any time, any jail time at all for the 1 count that he was convicted of. There is a caveat in this. He has already spent 201 days in the brig. That would be more than enough to cover the 4 months. But if he's convicted and given any jail time whatsoever, they can also reduce him in rank. He is an E7. He's had a very long career, decorated career as a Navy SEAL. He could be reduced in rank all the way to E1. I'm not saying that would happen, but that could happen. So that still there's something at stake for him as he after 2 years of this case moving through the court system. And I'm just trying to listen in a little bit on Andrea saying that she feels vindicated for her husband and feels vindicated by this process. Again, it's been a very long time. This started, he was taken into custody in September 11th, 2018. This all happened in Mosul in 2017. We found out during the trial that the investigation itself didn't start for almost a year after this body was supposedly stabbed in Iraq. Which made it very tougher for the prosecutors to prove their case. You have no body, and the crime scene is a war zone. We had the 2 SEALs that said, eyewitnesses said they saw Gallagher stab him, but then we saw 1 Marine raider who said he saw no stab wound on the body there. So we had conflicting testimony from people at the scene. Clearly that had something to do with the verdict today. We're going to see if we're going to... Right now, the 2 of them are basically embracing and hugging. Go ahead and pan over there. Now, Gallagher had gone through a couple of different defense attorneys before he chose Tim Parlatore and Mark Mukasik. This is another one of his attorneys here. Very high-priced, high-profile legal team here. They gave the prosecutors fits really since before this trial began. If you recall, the prosecutors in this case were thrown out for allegations of spying on the defense in this case, for inserting email trackers into emails to try to find the source of leaks to the media. Hundreds of pages of documents were leaked to the media. So the prosecutor had been thrown out even before this entire thing began. You have to imagine that has an impact on the ultimate decision here. But right now, we've got a very jubilant, very excited, decorated SEAL who now will be going home, if not immediately, quite soon. Reporting from Naval Base San Diego, Steve Walsh, KPBS News.
KPBS military reporter Steve Walsh, thank you very much for that latest on the update. Now, not long after the verdict, Congressman Duncan Hunter put out a statement. Part of his reaction reads, "The fact that this situation would happen to an American hero is nothing short of a disgrace for the entire military justice system." Hunter also says the Navy will still be held accountable for their actions in this matter, and I fully intend to continue working to protect America's war fighters. New pictures from the Department of Homeland Security show cramped conditions for people being held at the border. The photos were taken by the DHS Inspector General last month at a facility in Texas. The inspections were unannounced. Investigators found nearly 30% of the children held were there for more than 3 days. That's longer than legally allowed. Here in San Diego, Amnesty International claims the Mexican and U.S. governments are harassing human rights workers. KPBS reporter Max Rivlin-Nadler was there today as people protested outside of the federal building.
Since the start of the Trump administration, human rights lawyers and advocates have noticed a sharp uptick in harassment. This came to a head earlier this year when several lawyers and volunteers in Mexico were placed on a secret Department of Homeland Security watch list and denied entry into Mexico. Erika Guevara Rosas is the director of the Americas at Amnesty International. She described the report earlier today at the San Isidro port of entry.
They are being harassed, politically motivated by the Trump administration, precisely because they are replacing the work that the government should be doing. The United States government is collaborating with the Mexican government to continue the harassment even when they cross the border, to provide the support that the Mexican government hasn't been willing or able to provide to these asylum seekers, refugees, and migrants.
Human rights lawyer Erika Pinheiro, who works for the organization Al Otro Lado, was placed on the watch list. She says that separated her from her family and impacted her work.
My still valid visa to continue my work, and was stopped by Mexican authorities, detained for 4 hours, and removed back to the United States. I had to spend about a month outside of Mexico while I tried to get another visa to come back. I was separated from my child, who remained in Mexico, and was finally, when I finally was issued a visa and able to come back to Mexico, was detained again, interrogated. And my understanding from my attorneys in Mexico is that I will be interrogated anytime I come into contact with an immigration agent.
The report says the Department of Homeland Security interrogated reporters and advocates as they crossed the border and asked them to give information about the movements and plans of asylum seekers. Lawyers fear that material can now be used to build human smuggling cases against groups providing asylum seekers with humanitarian aid. The news outlet ProPublica also published a report on a secret Facebook group where Border Patrol agents posted racist and defamatory messages about migrants, human rights advocates, and members of Congress. This didn't surprise Jen Budd, who was a Border Patrol agent from 1995 to 2001.
This is nothing new for the United States Border Patrol. This is everything is status quo, and you can't sit there and tell me that it's just a few bad apples. This needs to be investigated. The Border Patrol has not been held accountable. The agents are the ones who do the hiring. The agents are the ones who do the training. The agents are the ones who do the firing. That is how come it stays so tight.
Protesters have gathered in front of the federal building this afternoon, calling on Congress to boost oversight of the Department of Homeland Security. They also want to end harassment and surveillance by Customs and Border Protection of lawyers and human rights advocates. Max Rivlin-Nadler, KPBS News.
The Trump administration is moving forward with plans to print census materials without a citizenship question. Last week, the Supreme Court ruled the question could not be included. Justices ruled the Trump administration did not make a clear enough case for why it wanted to include the question. Critics say it would have weakened participation, especially in states like California. A major new revenue stream will help San Diego International Airport expand over the next 10 years. The airport authority announced today that $500 million will come from new fees paid by airlines. There are no clear plans yet on what the money will be spent on. The airport is planning a replacement and expansion of Terminal 1. San Diego Mayor Kevin Faulconer says some of the money might pay for a trolley extension to the airport. New regulations are in effect for dockless scooters in San Diego. KPBS reporter Milena Spitzer went to Mission Beach to speak with residents and tourists about the changes.
Okay, on the wrong side. It's gone everywhere. Come on.
See that?
John Cole is a resident rollerblader here in Mission Beach. He says over the years, the boardwalk has changed dramatically, and not for the better.
Electric scooters, bicycles, skateboards, and I've seen a lot of accidents. So I'd like to see them ban them, simply because it's a boardwalk, ocean walk. It says it all. Shouldn't allow any motorized vehicles.
After hearing the concerns of residents like Cole, City Council adopted scooter regulations, which went into effect on July 1st. The rules require specific staging and parking areas for scooters and a speed limit of 8 miles per hour in certain geofenced areas, including Mission Beach and downtown. Rico Marquez, a rider and San Diego native now living in Arizona, says he thinks the regulations are a good idea.
It does need to be regulated. Sometimes I guess it can be hectic, especially a first-timer jumping on a scooter and not really knowing, the ins and outs and how to really ride it. It can be, I guess, dangerous at times.
In addition to enforcing speed, staging, and parking restrictions, scooter companies must pay a permit fee of more than $5,000 every 6 months and a $150 per device fee annually. Operators are also required to make a $65 safety deposit per scooter, which will be held in the event the company leaves without removing its scooters from the city streets. Despite the new rules, tourist Mark Portner says he's glad the scooters aren't going away.
Clean form of transportation. It can move me quickly where I need to get to, and they're just a lot of fun.
The city will also require scooter operators to purchase insurance and share data about ridership, parking, and paths of travel to assist the city in transportation planning and enforcement of the Climate Action Plan. Milena Spitzer, KPBS News.
Local health officials are now reporting a new case of E. coli that may be related to the San Diego County Fair. The San Diego Health and Human Services Agency confirmed the case this afternoon. It follows 4 cases reported over the weekend. In one case, a 2-year-old boy died. County health officials have traced the cases to contacts with animals, and the fair has closed its animal exhibits. For thousands of years, San Diego has drawn people searching for health and wellness. As part of our California Dream collaboration, KPBS's Amita Sharma traces the history of health seekers coming to Southern California. Today, she explores how the Koopa Indians came to eastern San Diego.
I see our homeland.
Eric Ortega is a descendant of the Koopa Indians. He walked through Warner Springs in eastern San Diego County on a recent afternoon.
My grandmother lived in one of those houses. My grandfather lived in those houses.
And just east of those homes are 2 large pools of fresh water, one hot, one cold. Ortega, standing yards away from the water, now part of a resort that's being fixed, says practicality and spirituality drew his ancestors here possibly as far back as 4,000 years ago.
The water was the healing. The water came out of the ground. We believe that it cleaned our bodies and our souls, took out a lot of the negativity. If you've had a hard day of hunting or gathering or something like that, you come in, you soak in a hot springs.
He says the water touched every aspect of Koopa society.
Our cold culture, a lot of our religious events were with dunking with the water, sprinkling with the water. It was a big part for us. Daily life.
When the stagecoaches carrying American settlers started traveling through the area in the 1850s, the Indians commercialized the hot springs.
We would do their laundry, wash their clothes. We would, let them bathe, let them drink water, feed them, and then they would pay us and be on their way.
Soon, some Americans who were sick and had moved to the region to heal heard talk that those hot springs just might be the remedy.
The claims that were made in the 19th century with these hot mineral waters could cure just about anything, if you believe the promoters. I mean, cancer, tuberculosis, all kinds of diseases.
Local historian Phil Brigandy says as the fame of the hot springs grew, the property became highly coveted. The land was deeded to Mexican-American citizen Jonathan Trumbull Warner in the 1840s, but the Indians continued to live there.
Eventually, the folks who owned the Warner Ranch, led primarily by a man named John Downey, who was a former governor of California, they decided they wanted access, among other things, to the springs there. And so they instituted a lawsuit treating the Indians as if they were trespassers.
The lawsuit prevailed. In 1903, the Coopa Indians were forced off the land. Some 200 men, women, and children were marched west to the Palo Reservation on a 3-day journey. Brigandy said the Pechanga Indians, who had been evicted from their land 28 years earlier, came to support the Coopa Indians soon after they arrived at Pala.
They brought a steer to barbecue, they brought oranges for the kids, and this amazing moment of these two Indian groups together, one who has survived removal and the other who's in the midst of it, you can't hardly imagine what was said around the campfires that night.
Ortega had talked to a woman who was 11 at the time the tribe was removed from the springs.
She said they were crying, they were howling.
Eventually, I think we'll have to buy our own land back.
That's Pala Band Chairman Robert Smith. He says descendants of the Coopas still want the property back.
Whatever it takes, we're going to do it.
In 2013, the Pala Band tried to buy back the land in bankruptcy court. Their bid was rejected. Ortega is optimistic that the ranch will eventually return to the Coopas' descendants.
It's part of our culture, and it's actually the center of our culture. And that's why we want this back so badly. And it wouldn't be to get it back to make a profit on it. It is our home.
Amita Sharma, KPBS News.
Tomorrow, we'll take a look at how San Diego was settled by tuberculosis patients and other sick people in the 1800s. You can find more stories from the California Dream Project at kpbs.org/dream. An environmental group from Imperial Beach is being recognized for its climate change work in Baja California. From the KPBS Climate Change Desk, Jade Hyman spoke with Zach Plopler of the nonprofit Wild Coast about its work.
Well, Zach, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So first, tell me, what is a mangrove?
So a mangrove is it's a blue carbon ecosystem. So it's an ecosystem that grows in a saltwater environment, either subtropical or tropical areas. It's a tree, and it's very unique to some certain parts of the world, Northwest Mexico being one of those.
So how are they able to remove carbon from the air and store it?
So just like any plant species, it intakes carbon, but what mangroves have, and especially these desert mangroves in Mexico, is this root system, very intricate root system, and a large soil substrate around it. So it takes the carbon in through its leaves, deposits it through its root system into this sediment below it, and it has these vast areas of the sediment around them where it stores all this carbon. That's why those ecosystems, those mangroves in Northwest Mexico are so effective at carbon sequestration.
And so how is it that these mangroves are so efficient at taking in carbon? Because they are much more efficient than, say, a forest of the same size.
Yeah, so they not only store the carbon within the plant itself, but they have this very intricate root system that then deposits it in this vast soil area around it. So it's not just directly under the tree itself, but around it as well. That's why these desert mangroves in Baja are so effective, because they have these big mud flats around this area. And the science shows that these desert mangroves in Mexico sequester up to 5 times more carbon than tropical mangroves.
And so how important are mangroves to climate change policy?
So in terms of policy, not enough yet. We're just learning how effective that these ecosystems are. We're trying to integrate them into policy in Mexico. And then there's similar ecosystems like seagrasses and salt marsh in California that actually can also play a big role. We're trying to integrate those into policy as well.
Do you have a sense of how much carbon this mangrove off of the coast of Baja California is actually taking in?
Right, so the 39,000 acres of mangroves that we've looked at in the Gulf of California and in Magdalena Bay and southern Baja California store about 19.5 million metric tons of carbon. That's the equivalency of about 1 million people's annual carbon emissions.
Wow. So Wild Coast has been working with the Mexican government on this restoration project. What does all of this entail?
Right, so we've been working with the Mexican federal government, the Mexican National Park Service essentially, since 2008 to set aside these mangrove areas for conservation. So they can't be owned, and by law they're actually protected. They can't be cut down. That doesn't mean that they're not cut down, and that doesn't mean that there's land uses around these mangroves that can have an impact. So we're buffering these areas. We're actually getting concessions for these mangroves to put them under the management of the Park Service, essentially creating protected areas where these mangroves are, where they weren't protected as well. We're also working with Griffith University in Australia to do all the science. So it's a tri-national effort between Wild Coast, which is a US and Mexico-based organization, the Mexican national government, and institutions in Australia to do the research to show how much carbon there is and to show what it would mean if we stopped the degradation of these forests.
And there's also an economic component to this project too, right?
Yeah, so the amount of carbon that is stored here and that would continue to be sequestered if we can leave these mangroves alone is about $500,000 on the voluntary carbon market. And these mangroves are also a basis for commercial fisheries, for ecotourism. So there's a lot of other benefits other than the carbon sequestration value of them.
So mangroves are helping sequester carbon dioxide, which contributes to climate change, but are mangroves also at risk because of climate change itself?
Absolutely. So in areas that mangroves don't have a place to migrate to, so with sea level rise, we're going to see coastal ecosystems move if they can. If there's development or agriculture, other land uses right up against where these mangroves are, they will not be able to migrate and they will actually be squeezed out by sea level rise. So it's not only important that we protect the mangroves that are there now, but areas around it to allow them to move over time.
If mangroves can be restored as you're doing in Baja, does that mean they can also be planted anywhere in the world to help guard against climate change maybe?
Not anywhere in the world. They grow in very particular climate, so it needs to be warm. There needs to be certain levels of salinity. But what we're looking at is reforestation projects in Mexico. So we just got a grant from the United Nations Development Program to restore about 100 acres of degraded mangroves in a place called San Ignacio Lagoon. That's the world's last undeveloped California gray whale breeding ground, also home to these mangrove ecosystems. So we're actually looking to reforest certain areas, and that project's very scalable to other areas in Baja, the Gulf of California, and throughout tropical parts of the world where these mangroves grow.
So what does this Keeling Curve Prize Award mean for Wild Coast?
So this Keeling Curve Prize shows recognition of our project. We're on to a great idea. We're getting a lot of exposure because of winning this award, but we're also getting $25,000 in funding. That it's going to help us advance the protection of these mangroves. It's going to allow us to continue to do the science, and we're also going to use that funding to go through the accreditation process. We have a project that's accredited in the voluntary carbon market, so we can actually work with the Mexican government to sell carbon credits that can then be reinvested in the management and conservation of these areas.
All right, I've been speaking with Zach Plopper, Conservation Director at Wild Coast. Zach, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm Judy Woodruff. Tonight on the NewsHour, inside the detention centers, Congressman Joaquin Castro on the conditions for migrants in U.S. custody. Coming up at 7 after Evening Edition on KPBS.
Team USA is heading to its third straight World Cup final. The defending champs beat England this afternoon, and KPBS video journalist Chris Arciaga was there today at a watch party at Petco Park.
Right side cross.
Yeah, they said 38 minutes or 380 minutes for England not to score or for not letting a goal, and it took 5 minutes against the US. Good job.
We're here at the Padres Park at the Park. Thank you to the Padres for allowing all these soccer fans to come out, watch the U.S. women play in their semifinal against England.
I'm going to be honest, I do want to see U.S. versus the Netherlands.
Yeah, same.
That would be fun.
Yeah, I feel like we've proved ourselves against Sweden.
Come on! Get in!
Watching as a fan, I feel like every other fan, you're nervous and anxious because you want them to win. So it's a little more white-knuckled on this end of it, but it's still fun.
We love you! We love you!
There you go, we'll follow, because we support the U.S., the U.S., the U.S. That's the way we like it. Come on, England! Chin up! Chin up! Chin up!
It's pretty impressive that at Tuesday at noon you've got hundreds and hundreds of people here showing up to watch a game. So I'm sure their bosses aren't happy they're all out here right now, but it's good for soccer in San Diego, and San Diego continues to prove that it's a great soccer market in all ways.
Team USA will play the winner of tomorrow's game between the Netherlands and Sweden. And the Women's World Cup final will be played Sunday morning at 8. Now here's a recap of tonight's top story. A military jury says Navy SEAL Eddie Gallagher is not guilty of murder. Gallagher spent the past 2 weeks on trial for the killing of a wounded fighter in Iraq in 2017. The jury also cleared Gallagher of other crimes related to his time in service, but he was convicted of taking photos with a dead body. For that count, he was sentenced to time served. You can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thanks for joining us. Have a great night.